My session is entitled Practical History. I'm not going to use any technology other than the video that you're seeing, and I'm not going to use any slides. I'm just going to talk you through how I see the teaching of history and how it can be done practically and without the need for all the whiz-bang and VR and AR technology that we're seeing a lot of these days. There are three examples I wanted to go through. The first example is one I used quite successfully when teaching about the First World War. It's a typical topic in British schools, and it's something that the kids really love. It's getting into the trench warfare and the attrition, but also the idea that we would do this kind of thing, this kind of slaughtering on a mass scale. And one of the big issues with the First World War was machine guns. Machine guns were a game changer. They were an incredibly defensive weapon. And what I wanted to get the students to understand was just how dangerous and how awful these things were. So I would take them out onto a field, and these are usually students between 11 and 14, depending on when I'm teaching the topic. And I would have them all stand in a line, and I would have one student at the other end of the field. And I'd say, right guys, now, we know what happened when soldiers advanced. Often they didn't run, often it was quite muddy, so it was quite slow. So I want you to walk towards this one student over here. When he shouts your name or she shouts your name, I want you to hit the floor and I want you to roll over and die like you've been shot. And so we would start, and we would do it very slowly at first, and of course the student would just fire off the names and the students would keel over, very funny. So right, okay, what did we learn? Okay, well, this isn't even a machine gun. This is someone taking aim and shouting your name, and that's mimicking, the impact. So then we try a run, and the same thing happens. Okay, and they never really get close to the student. And then I usually have a prize, a bag of chocolate, M&Ms or something. If you can get to the student, if you can touch him or her, then okay, you win and you've managed to get to the other trench. Say, right, now it's at a full sprint, see what you can do. And you have kids veering all over the place and trying desperately to hide and come, and it's a really interesting way of getting them to understand the nature of warfare in the First World War, the danger, the adrenaline, and it's all fun and games, but then you start talking about, well, look, these are people, and these are real injuries, these are horrific injuries that then happen. And you can see then two different things. One, the nature of warfare, and two, the nature of a defensive warfare, which is what happens in the First World War. So, my second example I wanted to talk about is about witches. Witches are a great topic, especially for younger students. But there's one of the things in witchcraft is witch hunts, and of course, witches. There's no such thing as witches. There's no such thing as magic, depending on what you believe. It's up to you. But what happens when someone thinks there's a witch? And so this is about rumor. This is about students kind of pretending, or students trying to figure out who the witch in the classroom is. So I give every student in the classroom a piece of paper. I say, right, if you have a blank piece of paper, you're not a witch. However, if you have a piece of paper with a dot on, and I hold up a piece of paper with a dot on, this one right here, that means you're the witch. And I hand these out, and everyone's all very excited. And so what happens then is they start to say, okay, well, who's the witch? So right, you've got to find out. You've got to ask questions. You've got to maybe make accusations. And so I just get them bubbling for 5 or 10 minutes. Who is it? Who's got the piece of paper? Who's the witch? And of course, no one has the piece of paper. They're all accusing one another without any foundation, without any ideas, and they're making things up. And what I will tend to do is I will tend to intimate, one of the more popular kids has been given the piece of paper, or I get them to play along a little bit. And what you have is an example of hysteria, an example of unfounded accusation, and then we take a step back and say, okay, well, what happened? Why did you make these accusations? And they can't think of why. And it's a really good way of trying to disassociate these two ideas. This idea of witchcraft and fear, and this idea of accusation. And then it's then picking into, okay, well, you were accused, but then you accuse someone else. So this idea of, if I'm doing the accusing, then I'm not going to be the one who's going to get hung for being, or hanged rather, for being a witch. So this is a really interesting way, just in a classroom, just a 5-10 minute exercise that can really get the students kind of playing about and talking with this sort of thing. In terms of the practicalities of history, one of the great things, and this requires a little bit of kind of resourcing, a little bit, is when you're then looking at medieval. So I'm going back in time now. I'm going from the 20th century witchcraft, kind of 17th, 16th century. We're going back to medieval, and giving students a chance to understand. Okay, well, what is it like to get attacked? If I have a shield and I'm being attacked by something. So you see it. You can play them videos if you have that opportunity, but this idea of using a shield to protect yourself. Now, this is where you can just go and steal some tennis balls from the PE department if you can, and grab some lunch trays from the dining hall, and then get the students outside. Okay, and this is just a really simple opportunity to think about the Roman Tortuga or Viking shield walls, and it's not about them protecting themselves from something dangerous. You're not firing arrows at the students, but what you are doing is you're launching tennis balls, and they're getting a sense of, okay, well, there's a thud. It's physical. It's a physical experience. Yeah. And so with this, you can start to say, well, what's the best way of protecting yourself? You get the lunch tray. You've only got a small tray like this. And this is better with younger students, if they're under 10. They're holding it. They're trying to work out the best way to kind of maneuver themselves. And then it's getting them to think about, okay, how do we best protect ourselves? And so naturally, the idea of a shield wall comes up. And this is Viking shield wall is especially good for this, and it's different people interlocking their shields. Or the Tortuga, which is a Roman version, where you have shields at the front and shields on the top to try and protect them, and you can get them moving forward. There's lots of different ways of playing about with this, but it's just taking really simple things that are going to be around anyway, and using them in a different way, and getting the imagination flowing. And this is the key thing about practical history, is imagination. And you can do more with this if you have a few different bits and pieces. Other things that I would always try and do with practical history is if you're studying something from a different country, try to bring something of the food of that country. That's always a great way of doing it. So if you're looking at ancient China, tea, and getting the children to drink tea, Chinese tea, green tea, and just thinking about, well, why? What's the benefit of this? Why are people drinking this? And of course with tea, in the same way beer in the UK, it was about making sure that people had a clean way of drinking liquid and drinking water. You couldn't drink the water in London, and so tea, you're boiling the water and you're creating tea. Or with beer, you're doing exactly the same thing. It's a sterilized drink, so you're able to drink it safely. So I'm not suggesting you give beer to your students, but rather things like tea, different kinds of tea from around the world, if you have that opportunity, or food, different fruits, vegetables, that you can get people thinking about, well, okay, let's go take China again and look at, well, where do they eat rice? Where do they eat noodles? And that's because China is a magnificent country, but it's huge as well. And so there are different crops grown in different parts of the world. And you can start to get into this. If you're doing some African history, you can start looking at yams and pounded yam. So it's really interesting just for them to start tasting things, and for them to start feeling things, and them to start engaging with history in a different way. So that for me is practical history. So the ideas are to use the imagination of young people, and this is really useful for students between the ages of 8 and maybe 14. Use what you have around you that you can allow students to play around with, and these can be everyday objects. It doesn't need to be technology that you're bringing in, and really focus on how those students can use their imaginations and your teaching and your ideas to the very best. So, practical history, I hope that was of interest. My name's Barry Cooper. I'm the principal at the Global College here in Madrid. I'm always free to connect with people on LinkedIn, and I'd love to hear about how you go about teaching where you are. Take care, and bye-bye.